hopefully we can be celebrating winning when you all go and vote for us.
Please don't beat yourself up if you don't have all the answers and solutions for that person at that moment and at that time.
You can take these moments, whatever it is, and just think to yourself, how can I get more learning out of that? Like, when is this appropriate in a different place? Or how will this affect them post-test?
Inspire Instructor Training Podcast, where the learning never stops.
Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Inspire Instructor Training Podcast, take 2. So we have already tried to record this. I have checked about 5 times that this one is actually recording. We already recorded a lovely 45-minute episode of what we're about to talk about, and I'm hoping this 45 minutes or less will be just as good. If not, me and Diana enjoyed the previous podcast anyway. But yeah, welcome, Diana.
Hiya.
Hi. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is it's awards season in the driving instructor industry. And we are nominated for lots and lots of awards, which we are super happy about, and proper chuff that people nominated us. And we also nominated ourselves with the Intelligent Instructor. So please go and vote for us, I think is my first message. No, Diana did this in the first cut, and she was far nicer than me and was saying it's lovely that everyone's nominated and all that sort of stuff. But I'm far more just go vote for us, please. We've worked really hard this year and created Inspire and put loads of effort in, and we hope you love it. Whether it's the podcast or our videos or our membership, we hope you love it, and we hope you love it enough to go and vote for us. So pretty please go and vote for us. Let me just kind of go through how it. So I'm going to put the links in the show notes, but for the Intelligent Instructor, we are nominated for Training Provider of the Year. And also, I'm going to put this little added extra. I know this is an Inspire Instructor Training podcast, but could you also pretty please go and vote for Cowley's for the regional driving school of the year? For 2 years running, I've been highly commended, and I want to take that next step. So pretty please go vote for Cowley's. And then I'm going to keep saying pretty please vote for us. So also with Go Roadie Awards, and again, I'll put the link in the show notes. We are nominated in a few categories. So again, we have CPD Provider of the Year. We also have Content Provider of the Year, which is mainly for the podcast. So people listening can go and vote for that. We have Community of the Year for our mentorship, and because we genuinely believe that is a lovely community that we've created, as well as obviously a mentorship. Again, Cowley's are in the regional driving school of the year, and also we have both myself and Diana are in the ADI of the year, so you can pick your favorite and go and vote for that. Maybe we should just do a little poll to see who people voted for, if we can't see it.
Absolutely not, because I fear you would cry.
That's not where I thought that sentence was going. So yeah, like I say, I genuinely I love these awards. I think obviously we want to win, but I do think it's also a nice celebration of the industry. And if you look through that list of people nominated in all the categories, if nothing else, it kind of shows you what the industry has on offer. Even when it's like whether it's insurance companies or cars available or leasing companies, and then your sort of kind of diary apps and things like that. There's just so much available to ADIs, and I think this is a great way of celebrating that. And hopefully we can be celebrating winning when you all go and vote for us.
And good luck to everybody else that is shortlisted
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, no, good luck to you. Also, on that note, it's something I've always shied away from. I don't put my name forward for these things. I don't really know why I don't do it. I think it's probably if I'm not in the race, then I can't be upset if I don't win. But please do. I've had a bit of a shift in focus, and actually, it's okay not to win. It's just really, really blooming nice to be shortlisted. And if you never put your like self forward for these things, then and actually we were lucky we did for intelligent instructor, but we didn't for Go Roadie, which was it was nice that was done. And I think it's so important that you guys celebrate yourselves as well. So I'm hoping that there'll be an influx of award submissions next year off the back of this, so that we can all celebrate one another and how great the industry is becoming.
Yeah. And in the meantime, go vote for us.
Go vote for us, yeah. I also echo Phil's thought. Pretty please go vote for us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I know, I appreciate it takes time, and so we do genuinely appreciate people going off and voting for us. It's really lovely when people send you a little message saying I voted. Although I do sometimes think they say I voted, and then I'm like, I want to question whether they voted for us because they just said I voted. Doesn't mean we got their vote. So shall we move on to, and we have changed the format slightly for today's episode. So today we're going to, instead of having Phil's thoughts, we're going to have Diana's thoughts. And instead of Diana digs deeper, we're going to have Phil digs deeper. Let's go straight ahead with Diana's thoughts.
So my thoughts for today are all about being a little bit kinder to yourself. I've had several conversations over the past few months where instructors are sort of almost beating themselves up over what they can and can't do. And what I mean by that is instructors will say some fantastic reflections to me, such as they noticed that they over instructed, or they crossed levels of instruction, or they couldn't quite get the words out in time. And they were reflecting upon that and then almost beating themselves up. Now, in several of these situations, that's usually been caused by some kind of gap in the training or gap in the instructor's teaching. So they've had, a couple of weeks off, or they've had car issues, or they've been out of the industry for a while, or what have you. And I think sometimes, especially with CPD, and there's a lot of voices, a lot of support out there, which is great. We almost try to do everything all the time. There's no such thing as a perfect lesson, whether that be from the pupil's perspective or whether that be from the instructor's perspective. It's about recognizing it and then working on it in the future and giving yourself a little break. I've also seen this evident when we get those pupils that have extreme needs or have had some traumatic experiences in the past, that they start to have conversations with their instructor, which is fantastic. It's a great safe space. It's good for the instructor to be able to almost recognize the fact that the pupil feels safe in that environment. But when a pupil is unloading information onto you about where their mental state is, and when it's to this extreme state that actually counselling would be the first thing that pops into your mind, please don't beat yourself up if you don't have all the answers and solutions for that person at that moment and at that time. Now, we work in an industry where, we have a little bit of knowledge of coaching. We have a little bit of knowledge of mindfulness. We have a little bit of knowledge about lots of different things. And sometimes we have to be able to signpost people elsewhere. We don't have all the answers. And it could be even dangerous for us to dip our toe in that water and pinpoint them to a solution that we think is appropriate if we're not qualified to do so. So I think my thoughts are scrambled, but my thoughts are very much about being kind to yourself as an instructor. Know your own limitations and know that you cannot help everyone all the time. You can't.
In that last sentence, you sort of kind of said about like you can't help everyone, and I think for me it's the nature of a driving instructor. I think is we want to. We are a group of helpers, and we, in a way, it's sometimes the issue people have with coaching because they want to help and they think helping sometimes means like I'm just going to give you the answer, and so that can sometimes be the holdback with people with instructors because they're so keen to help that they just blurt out the information instead of allowing the learner to discover it for themselves. But I think the same happens here. It's you've got somebody in front of you who is struggling for whatever reason, and it's difficult to not want to help that person, but it can be dangerous, like you said, like knowing a little bit can be dangerous in a way because you start giving solutions that aren't suitable. So yeah, 100% agree on that. But I also think and those are quite extreme sort of kind of scenarios, and I've come across them where I've had scenario where I had a pupil who was going through counselling when I was teaching her, and she had severe sort of kind of agoraphobia, wouldn't couldn't get out of the car. So didn't want to come out of the house, didn't want to leave the driveway because it was too far from a house. There was feelings of being trapped within the car. She had a fear of traffic lights, which was not helpful because there's a lot of them. And it was just one thing after another, like leading on, sort of kind of thing. And her driving ability was fine. It was just we couldn't get past this psychological issue, and I really wanted to help her, and I tried everything I possibly could. I even went and did some extra courses and really tried to sort of kind of find a solution. But it was beyond my skill set, and I can imagine. And she was eventually we decided to stop lessons because she just didn't. She wasn't in the right place to learn to drive. But I still, and this is where the whole "don't beat yourself up" bit kind of comes in. Is I know that I did everything I could for that pupil, but I still feel it's like a unfinished business on my sort of kind of report card of pupils, and I think that is something that can hang on you, and I think that's the bit where you got to kind of let go. But I still tell this story, so it's obviously still I'm still aware of it clearly. So I think that's the bit that people struggle with. But I suppose if I had been maybe the one that when actually, why don't you go and speak to this, or I think you should go and have a look at this charity or whatever, then maybe that would have maybe felt more like I had done a service, but she was already going through the NHS and doing that. But I also wanted to kind of talk about here with this the less extreme versions of this, where it's not mental health um, or something like more severe that we can't deal with. But actually, we see this a lot in manual to auto and how instructors who are teaching manual have a pupil who is really struggling um, and probably would like do a lot better being in manual instead of being in auto. But I think they hold on to them for whatever reason, whether it's a sometimes it's an ego thing. It's like I can get you through a manual because I'm good enough. Sometimes again it's a I want to help you, just like let me be the person that helps you. Um, Sometimes it can be a not wanting to give up on the pupil. And so feeling like you've let them down or you've told them they're not good enough. And so that scenario can be really challenging. It's a difficult conversation. It's difficult to know when to have that conversation. It's difficult also, I think, particularly if you're maybe new to the game, to know, is it the pupil that's struggling or is it me? Have I just found a pupil that's got to the point where I've not got the skill set to push this pupil forward. And I think that is an option as well to kind of go, actually, maybe a more experienced instructor should teach you, and in manual maybe, and then that instructor can make the call of whether it should be auto. I think you should just be okay with being honest with pupils about that sort of kind of stuff. But I get that's easier said than done.
I think that decision is slightly longer when a pupil is in automatic. Because for me, if your pupil is driving a manual, you have more options to explore beyond manual that are deemed easier. And yeah, they are easier, for people that are, struggling with a particular skill. But if they are then struggling in an automatic, there's very limited options other than getting the bus. That's it. There's not much hope in terms of what can we do now to help you get from A to B safely. And I think there's also an element as well where these needs, these support needs, whether it be extreme or whether it be that somebody just can't get over a fear of roundabouts or can't get over a mindset or attitude towards other road users, or whether whatever it may be, if they can't get past that, that doesn't always show up in the first 20 hours. It might be that it shows up several months, half a year down the line. And actually that feels like a weightier decision. And I had a conversation with an instructor recently, someone that I absolutely respect and value. And he found himself in that similar situation in an automatic with a pupil who'd had, 26, 30 hours, something like that. And he was saying, with literally making no progress in this stage, not one bit of progress in this element. And he kept the conversation very frank and detailed with the pupil and the parents because the transparency was there. Now, I think that's really, really important. And then it's up to the pupil and their choice on whether they continue or not. And it's interesting, actually, when I think about, the experiences I've had, and I've had, I find myself currently in that situation in some ways. But I found myself in that situation recently, and I was able to have that conversation very, very, what's the word? Not quickly, but decisively, maybe is the better word, because I didn't to and fro with it. I could see earlier on that we weren't making progress in any way, shape, or form because of X, Y, and Z. And that then became a conversation piece. And we found different solutions. I have this person now sitting in the back of other lessons. So it's not as if I gave up on them, and it's not as if, and that's probably still plays a part in me wanting to help them and not cutting the apron strings, and they have another family member learning to drive with me. So it just naturally happened that way. That felt more supportive, but that's a very unique situation. And I just feel that that is a weightier decision when the options are much more limited beyond the auto.
Yeah, definitely. And then I suppose that you said the next option was bus. I would probably chuck one extra option in there in the fact that there are instructors out there who like specialize in challenging pupils. So if you have a local instructor who you know maybe thrives in these scenarios, that might be someone to to reach out to as well. I I think something just I want to like mention before we move on is um we talked about not beating yourself up about having these concerns and being worried about not being able to sort of kind of fix your pupil in whatever way. Um, but I think actually what I want to say is that there's an element of if you're thinking that already, then you're probably doing a good job because the fact that you even care enough to be worried about letting your pupil down or worried about not being able to get this pupil to where you want to be, where they want to be, shows that you care enough to support them where you can, probably care enough to improve yourself as an instructor to be able to maybe help future pupils or care enough to signpost them because you know there are limitations to what we can do. And I'm sure there are a lot of instructors out there that don't have that attitude and would just go, this pupil's too difficult for me, and then probably just ghost them and stop teaching them. Um,
Ghost
and
them.
yeah, I remember seeing a Facebook thing saying, I think my driving instructor's just broken up with me. Um,
Yes, I saw that.
because they basically said, look, your lessons are too difficult. And so I think actually I take solace in the fact that you care enough because that to me says you're doing a good job.
Yeah.
So, shall we move on to our question? So, we've taken our question from our so every week we do a live Q&A for our members, where they can come and ask questions about what's troubling them that week. And so, yeah, we have our question from there. So, the question is, how do you deal with pupils who have had some form of tuition from their parents where poor habits or attitudes have been learned? To give an example, I have a couple of pupils who consistently break the speed limit during lessons. I've had the usual conversations, what's the speed limit here? Why is that the speed limit here? What's the risk of going faster than the speed limit? With the attitude coming back, well, there's no one around, so it doesn't really matter. My mum and dad always break the speed limit without any issue. Go.
Okay. So for me, there's a couple of elements there. I completely understand that when you have a pupil that has a little bit of experience in everything, sometimes it can just be messy in terms of what your approach is to handle that situation. Um, but what I wanted to put across, first of all, is I think the pupils that have private practice, I think the positives far outweigh the negatives because I think that you then have more time to talk to them about various different challenges, whether that be attitude behaviors, whether that be finessing some of the skills that they need, because they've got the crux of bits and pieces of it. So I've got a pupil at the moment who is, and it's almost backwards in terms of my approach because she can do lots of things well. And I'm going to say well because, she gets from A to B and she still stays alive. But it's not pretty always. And I'd like her to have a little bit more knowledge and understanding. I'd also like to challenge her mindset in some situations if she's going to be on the roads with me. I want to, make sure she's going to be the safest driver for her. But as a general rule, she can get from A to B. So we just nip things in the bud as they appear based on their priority. So, for example, we worked out that she's stopping at every junction. She's not seeing gaps. And her mirror use isn't great either. So because we're stumbling across what she can and can't do, it feels very bitty and sometimes backwards. So I was working last week on assessing the gap on approach to roundabouts, but still quite supportive in terms of her mirror use, which is a generic instructor syllabus. You would typically do that the other way around. But she's going off and doing roundabouts with her parents. And for me, the greater need at that point in time, the thing that was getting her into trouble was that. So I prioritized that and I supported her on the rest and I shared that with her. Now, the difference to what this instructor has said and my pupil is the attitude. Because actually what my pupil has is confidence, but the right type of confidence, the right type of level of confidence. She'll have a go at things, but she understands her limitations. There does seem to be an element of, what's the word? It's almost, overconfidence isn't the right word, but just marginally thinks that her skill set is greater than it is. So we're having to sort of work on the decisions that she makes versus the decisions that her parents will make and why that's the case. The thoughts that she has versus the thoughts that other people will have on the road and what impact that has on her. And I think why I'm leading with that is no different really to the conversation that I would be having with the pupil that thinks speeding is okay because nobody is around it. Nobody is around them. And I'd start by helping them anchor what it is about their learning to drive journey that they want to achieve. Why do they even want to learn to drive? What's their values? How are they going to base or benchmark their success within driving? So I start to have conversations like that with them to see what the values are and how they're going to anchor their choices around that. So is it that they want their insurance to be cheaper in a year? Who is it that's paying for their insurance? Is it mum and dad? Is it them? Um, is that something that they would value? Is it the opinion of how they handle the car? Is it that they want to be able to afford a better car in the future? What impact might their decisions now have on future versions of themselves? And that would be the type of conversations that I would start with them. Now, I'm very aware that from a demographic point of view, this quote might get lost, but if any of you have seen the Sliding Doors movie, it's all about, what happens with option A when they get the train and what happens with option B when they don't get the train and how life just unfolds. And I think that's what I would be exploring with this pupil. So if you do X, Y, and Z in the lead up to whatever their value is, whether it be the opinion of their dad, the insurance, what have you, how likely is it you're going to get there? But if you choose to speed continuously and there isn't anyone around at the moment, what advantages and disadvantages are there to you in that situation when you find yourself in a different road, in a different environment with other people in the car? What's the advantages and disadvantages there at that moment in that time? And how might that affect your future self? I'd probably go down the anticipatory regret route as well, where I'd have them consider the two options. What's the best self look like? What does their not so best self look like? But I wanted to also touch on the fact that I'd get the parents involved because sometimes we as instructors can make assumptions that people are speeding because they don't care about the law or they don't care about the rules of the road or whatever we think that their reasons are. But it could just be that their environment that they've been exposed to has them believe that it is perfectly appropriate to go 10% over the speed limit. My father-in-law is like that, law-abiding citizen up until the speeding point. But it's not somebody that you would think, oh, you're an absolute plonker. He's not. He's a decent human being that makes good choices, yet he absolutely fully believes that it's perfectly safe and appropriate to go 10% over the speed limit plus two, but he does it based on the sat nav speed limit because he won't be prosecuted. And that to me is more of an education piece and having those parents understand how, in some cases, that might be okay for them. That's their choice. But that environment they're exposing their son to with very, very, very limited experiences may have completely different outcomes. And that's where I would probably go with that conversation.
So I am just remembering that the last time you answered this question, I finished it with, I've got nothing to add. And you said, oh, is this recording? Turns out, no, it wasn't. So I'm not going to say it again this time. Just, just in case it jinxes the record. Um, yeah, again, no, genuinely have nothing to add. So yeah, that's exactly what I would agree with. So let's move on to Phil Digs Deeper and steal your segment. So I want to talk about a lesson I had about 6 months ago. And we recorded this lesson, and it is on our mentorship page as one of our lesson feedbacks that we do sitting in the lesson. And we were driving along with this pupil, and I think this is just a really good example of taking a nothing moment and turning it into a learning opportunity. And I think this is why we do Diana's Digs Deeper, is giving you some examples of that. Basically, how can we take these moments and milk them for a learning opportunity. So driving along with this pupil, we are approaching a set of traffic lights and we're having a chat. And I pause the conversation because I know the pupil will want to concentrate on this traffic lights. It's a slight uphill. Quite regularly, when you stop at these lights, they turn green at the moment you stop, and then you've got to kind of quickly get your clutch control sorted and get ready to move off. And I know pupils have had issues at this set of traffic lights before. So I shut up and let him concentrate. And then he moved off. It was fine, and off we went. And that could have just been it. Like, off we go. Well done. Good move off. Let's carry on our chat. But instead of that, I actually brought up the fact that in that moment, because I was in the car, I was able to recognize that something was coming up and therefore pause our conversation. As an instructor, I proactively did that. As a driver, maybe he could be the one that does that and pauses the conversation. But the person next to you sees why. They see you approaching the busy roundabout, the difficult scenario ahead. I remember when I was a kid, my dad we used to play games in the car on long journeys, and he used to ask me to stop so he could concentrate. But when I'm a kid, I'm like, why? We're playing a game. Come on, it's not that difficult. And now obviously I get it, but I think this is the issue, and I brought it into the mobile phones, because when you're on the phone with someone, they can't see that. They can't see the hazard. They can't see what's coming up. So when you stop talking, or even when you ask them to stop talking, they don't know, so they kind of carry on, and it's distracting. And it's why the collision rates with mobile, like hands-free phone calls, is just as high as collision rates with mobile phone calls, because it turns out it wasn't the use of one hand that was the issue; it was the distraction. Um, and I think this is what, and also your brain sort of kind of is like projected to the other person. And so you're kind of not necessarily fully focused on the road ahead. And so I think it was just this moment of nothing happening, just me pausing for a second, made me think, oh, that's a bit like when you're having a conversation with someone on a phone and you can't pause. So I brought that triggered me to sort of have that conversation with the pupil, and we dug into it. We had a nice long conversation about mobile phone use, and it just kind of led on from there. And this is kind of what I want to get across, though, is you can take these moments, whatever it is, and just think to yourself, how can I get some more learning out of that? Like, when is this appropriate in a different place? Or how will this affect them post-test? Like, can we have a conversation about that? Where is there any more learning I can get from this moment? Now, it could be that you don't want to have that conversation because you've got a roundabout coming up, or you're busy dealing with car control, or whatever the scenario is. But actually, in my scenario, that we were heading back home, we'd had a pretty good lesson. This pupil was pretty capable of driving, unaided, like coming up to test sort of kind of thing. And so it was just a great sort of conversation that we could have. It was either that, or we were going to talk about what our favorite TV was all the way home. So it gave them something, an extra learning point to add to the lesson. And I just think, yeah, when you're out there on the roads, see if you can find those nuggets where you can kind of keep that learning going, and turn at what is an effectively nothing moment into a nice learning opportunity.
Yeah. And I think what we touched on earlier as well, it's where appropriate. So sometimes when you have the opportunity to dig deeper and it's going to benefit the pupil in the long run, absolutely take it if it's appropriate and if it's valid. And the reason I'm mentioning that is sometimes there comes a point where you have to just crack on and do something. Because I've had those conversations where I've sat at the side of the road and I've had some really lovely conversations. But then the pupil will ask something else, or they'll give another throwaway comment and another throwaway comment. And I could take that and grasp it and go down the rabbit hole, and still 30 minutes and we ain't moving yet. And I'll give you an example specifically of that where I sat in the back of a PDI lesson the other day, and this pupil had had a little bit, well, no, quite a major breakdown the week before, just 2 days prior, actually, because she had a lesson the Friday, then a lesson on the Monday. To the point where we were, and we needed this, we were sort of pulled over for a good 45, 50 minutes of the lesson. She was late coming out, 45, 50 minutes. It's an hour and a half lesson. So really a big chunk of it. We were almost just working through what she was working through at that moment in time. So when she then had her next lesson on the Monday, we talked about sort of, cracking on with those sort of goals so that she had some practical experience because it was building up in her head. And she just wasn't, getting enough practical experience. Had a really, really lovely conversation, some fantastic goal setting in terms of building confidence with speed and making choices. Really nice. We had a plan. We were off to do it. And we were literally, she put our thing into drive, the, what do you call it, the gear stick thing into drive. And I know, sorry, like I lost my train of thought there. He's just laughing at me if you're listening to this rather than watching it. And she said, I'll drive as long as the roadworks aren't there. And the instructor said, well, no, they aren't there, but just pop it back into park for me. What is it about the roadworks that unsettles you, makes you not want to drive there if that's the case? And I got them to pause because I said, well, they're not there. So let's not make this an issue at this moment, at this time for this pupil. Lovely question, though. Really, really lovely question. Loved it. And if we hadn't have sat there for 15 minutes at that point and 45 minutes just the time before, then it would have felt appropriate. But at that moment, at that time, it wasn't. And quite rightly so, the PDI did pull me up and he went, these bloody trainers, they tell you one thing, they did tell you another thing. But I think that's the point. It has to feel appropriate. It has to feel like it's the right time. And if it's going to benefit them, then go for it. But if it's not a priority, then don't. Save that. Keep that ace up your sleeve for another point in time. Take a note for it. Discuss it at another point in time, and crack on.
Yeah, I think it is challenging, that, isn't it? Where knowing the difference, knowing when and when not to do that. Because actually, that conversation, most people would just be like, "Yeah, roadworks aren't there. Let's go." And you probably would have told him off for not picking it up. So, but a lot of the time, that is the it's a really good example, actually, because even though you said not to in that particular moment for lots of other factors, but that's the sort of thing we're talking about, where it's a throwaway comment, and could easily just be brushed over. But actually, I would want to know, what is it about the roadworks that worry you? And so it is one of those moments but I fully get that you were about to then just have 2 lessons in a row not actually doing any driving. So yeah, it's a unique scenario. I think 9 times out of 10 that conversation needs to be happening. And it was a good question. So I think even though you're saying don't in that particular scenario, and don't if you're approaching a busy road, or if you're like really sort of like heavily dug into a particular topic, and that conversation is going to just send you off on a spiral elsewhere, and you're going to lose focus of what you're doing. That's another kind of example of when not to. But actually, that example is also a really good example of when you should go, actually, that's something we should have a look at. Why is that a thing? Because actually, I'd want to know what the pupil, like, whether is it because you were worried about moving off, you were worried about getting stuck in the, I don't know, loads of different reasons why it could be. So yes, it's a fine balance, but
There's
um,
nothing to stop them from making that a little bit of a conversation piece on the debrief or a conversation piece in the next school setting or, something like that. And that's what I mean by having that ace up your sleeve because it's just not appropriate at that time for whatever reason. Um, but exploit when it is,
yeah,
yeah, like you said.
yeah. You know what? That would be the sort of thing that would probably pop back into my head next time we were at a roadworks, and then I go, "Oh, do you remember when you said you don't like roadworks? Tell me why."
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. So, shall we wrap it up and call it a day for take two of episode 43?
Thank you, everyone, for listening to us. If you didn't get the memo, please vote for us. And we really hope that we've inspired you to be the best instructor that you want to be.
Thank you.
Bye.
Inspire Instructor Training Podcast, where the learning never stops.